Okay, remember that they're changing my voice. This video is about the evidence that God exists. I have many, many points in various papers. In this paper, I have 15, 20 points. I'm going to just try to touch on some of them. Before I begin, I want to point out something that's very obvious to everyone on the planet, really. You got to understand that basically everybody is good at something. So being good at drawing does not prove that your life's smart. Being good at science does not prove that your life's smart. Okay, making sound decisions and going after a true and potent love with moral, mental, spiritual, romantic clarity. Okay, whether you achieve that love or not. Making wise decisions that transcend mere money and social norms and people's individual racial conceptions. That shows us a superior philosophy. Not being, just a rich person or a politician or whatever. Most people see through celebrity worship, politician worship. They see right through that. And they know beyond a reasonable doubt that it's stupid to be one of those bootlickers, one of those sheep who just jumps on board with the celebrity worship and the politician worship. So one of the most damning and obvious proofs that God exists is in the fact that the spectrum of monotheistic people, okay, in the spectrum we find the most respectable people historically, the wisest and the best historically. As we look at other philosophies, we might see people who seem nice and friendly like Buddhists, but they never do anything that impressive. And again, science is not that impressive. Going out and achieving and living a righteous life that transcends social norms, that's impressive. That's life wisdom. That's why in the Bible it says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Okay? And we'll get to that later. If you disagree, hell, go ahead and put it in the comments. Everyone knows that, Hawking and Dawkins, these people are not that impressive. There's many, many people with a fancy degree. In fact, 80% of adults have a college degree. And almost all of them, if they put their minds to it, could have achieved a PhD. It's not that hard to get a PhD. It's not that hard to have a bunch of bootlickers kissing your ass because you fixate on insignificant, book stuff, book smarts, mere book smarts, science, philosophy, psychology. That's neither here nor there. Okay, so this video was, I first looked at a video by Ask Cliff, right? His name is Cliff or something, right? And it was from a channel that was reposting one of his videos. And the video was titled something to the effect of The Evidence That God Exists. Ask Cliff. So for the first 11 points, and he didn't number it correctly, right? He left out the 4 and 5 in the video, unless it just didn't show up in the annotation, but there was nothing there that would suggest that there's a 4th or 5th point. But nonetheless, there was good points that were made. Points, some of them were points that I talked about myself, right? Having to do with what came first and why did things come out this way and so on and so forth. So the first point that he makes, or before he makes the first point, he says, first prove that I'm not a bad dream, or that, what you see is actually reality. See, first prove that I'm actually here. If you can't do that, then we're talking about the most logical assumption, okay? And we're talking about faith, and we're talking about what do intelligent people who have proven superior lives, what do they believe? Because nothing can be proven. So the atheist cannot prove that God doesn't exist. The Buddhist can't prove that he's right. The Hindu can't prove he's right. Okay, scientifically, nothing can be proven. So first prove the nature of reality. They can't do it. So it leads us to the first point, the design. He brings up Mount Rushmore, right? He says, if I'm not mistaken, that's the place where the president's heads are carved from the mountain. He said, do you believe that nature did that by itself? Right? What is the design of things? Right? Waterfalls, beaches. Okay. The design itself has proof of God. The second point, the universe has a beginning and an end, or excuse me, maybe not an end, but has a beginning. And the best explanation, he used the phrase uncaused cause, which it makes it unnecessarily complicated. But in a nutshell, even the Big Bang Theory deals in things in terms of a chronological order. Right? There's a big bang at the beginning, and then it creates the universe as we know it. So it has a beginning. And the best explanation for that beginning is God. What else would it be? Just nothing? Well, what would it be? A chicken? What would it be? Just a mere atom? The best explanation is God. The next point, the third point, is the entropic principle. It might sound fancy, right? Entropic principle. Well, hear me out here. The principle goes like this. Life is balanced on a razor's edge. Okay, there are so many ingredients that go into allowing this earth to sustain life that it can't be an accident, right? That this is something that is balanced on a razor's edge. Life is balanced on a razor's edge. Only a fool would believe that that's by accident. Now, I broke the next parts of his explanation in regards to the entropic principle into the two other points because he didn't say point 4, point 5. So my point 4, and his point 4, is if the earth was a bit closer to the sun, we would all fry. And if it was a bit further from the sun, we would all freeze. Think about that. If it was just a little bit further from the sun, we'd all freeze. If a little closer, we would all fry. Point number 5, which is also elaborating on the entropic principle. DNA has a lot of densely packed information. Charles Darwin pointed out that if something is irreducibly complex, the whole idea of evolution by chance falls apart. Now, Charles Darwin is someone who atheists and other people who want to argue that magically God doesn't exist or it's not proven or whatever. He's someone they cite, scientists. And he says that if something is irreducibly complex, the whole idea of evolution by chance falls apart. Michael Behe, I believe his name is, the biochemist at Lehigh, points out that irreducible complexity shows that you cannot go from this stage to this stage to this stage to this stage, okay, in a different manner, because between those states, if that is missing, that never happens. So in other words, in order to get a human being, we have to go from various states, right? You know, the universe has to start at some point. A single-celled organism has to emerge, something to that effect, as far as we know, okay? The various forms of evolution, the various stages of evolution and phases of evolution must take place. If that never happens, we don't have a human being. So the reason why Charles Darwin said that if something is irreducibly complex, okay, that the whole idea of evolution by chance, right, without a principled design, without a designer, without a creator, something that's occurring just by chance, falls apart. That is outrageous. That is so unlikely that it just falls apart. It's just not a logical thing to assume. And again, we just have to prove that the logical assumption is that there's a God for people to know that the best way for them to live their lives is as a monotheistic, scrambling to be precisely moral, even if it kills them and their family. We just have to prove that there's a God. We just have to prove that the logical assumption is that there's a God and that God is just, which is very easy for an intelligent person to prove. This is not something that's hard for me to prove, especially when I look at what other people have said already. This is a walk in the park right here. Walk in the park. Okay. So the living cell is irreducibly complex. The living cell, before we even get a human being, the living cell itself, the single-celled life form, for example, is irreducibly complex. If you have any questions about these terminologies, again, just put in the comments, right? Irreducibly complex means it has to go from this stage to this stage to this stage to this stage, right? And that makes it a complex organism in its own right. The single-celled organism, the human being, the bird, you name it. So point number 6, moral absolutes. He uses the example of killing of innocent children. He said, well, the overwhelmingly logical assumption, at least, is that moral absolutes exist. To kill innocent children for no reason is absolutely wrong. You get horrible people, monsters, who would argue that that's not the case. But if you're killing them for no reason at all, even a monster who thinks it's part of his philosophy, it's not part of his philosophy, it's for no reason, then that must be wrong, right? So if you accept that the overwhelmingly logical assumption is that moral absolutes exist, then you accept that, and you accept the overwhelmingly logical assumption is that God exists and God is just. We'll get to that. Point number 7. Love in its various forms is an innate human ability that people have to genuinely care. So why does love exist? Right? Why is it innate? Why do we see it in its various forms in nature? Okay, because God is a loving God and he's a just God. Why, if God is cruel, why did he allow love to exist? Are you going to argue God is cruel because when you go to the gym you have to try hard to work out? And you're going to throw away the logic that goes into having worked hard for something and being proud of yourself and feeling a sense of fulfillment? Point number 8. Rational minds. Rational minds. The mind must come from a rational being, because a rational mind is a positive evolutionary trait to get to a moral path and finish. And that part wasn't in the video, right? Why must a rational mind come from a rational being? Well, why does there have to be a rational mind? What are the odds that life comes into existence and there's rational minds that can think for themselves, that can analyze the situation, and there's all these things to analyze. There's like an infinite amount of things and ideas to analyze. What are the odds of that? Okay. So a rational mind is a positive evolutionary trait, right? To get to a moral path and finish, to follow the course that a just and loving and righteous God has set before us, we need that rational mind. And we need the ability to be able to say, that's the most logical assumption and not that. I said there's a creator is a more logical assumption to have. And if somebody lives on an assumption that is as important as in regards to existential ideas, right? Why we're here, what the purpose of life is. And they say, hey, that's not so important. I'm going to pretend this and this. And they're a dumbass. You may as well be sitting in your room all day saying, hey, I don't believe that it's more worthwhile to go out there and to actually achieve or to bring something home that's important or whatever. You have to have the logical assumption. You have to live by the most logical assumption. What is the purpose of life? What's the most logical assumption? Okay. Now, on top of that, here I am, the top martial artist ever, the son of 2 doctors, 1 a brain surgeon. And no one has presented a viable counter-argument to my most controversial and key ideas, which makes me the most intelligent person on the planet here at least, and when you do the math, ever lived. But we'll get to that in another video. Speaking of rational minds, the most rational mind, the most wise. Point number 9. That humans have a drive for meaning. Now, what does it mean, right? Why do we have a drive for meaning? If figuring out what the most logical assumption is doesn't matter and it's just all by chance, why do we have a drive to figure it out? Why are there so many scientists and religious people? Why do so many people go to religious organizations and spiritual organizations? Why? Because human beings overwhelmingly at least have a drive for meaning. He points out that Albert Camus, a French atheist, existentialist, made the argument that the only question modern man must answer is why not commit suicide. Now, why did he say this? Because the world is so unfair, because people reject the logical assumption as to why we're here, which is a loving God who's all good, all knowing, and all powerful, put us here for a reason, for us to use our heads. And quite often it's some idiot who argues, well, I don't think it's fair. Well, you're an idiot. You're not the top martial artist. You're not even a brilliant scientist. You're just a dumbass who says, I don't think it's fair, so I'm going to act like a fucking idiot. Okay? And that's part of the evidence you have that I'm right and they're wrong. Because when people evolved to outmaneuver each other in hand-to-hand combat and natural warfare, I came out on top. That's something that everybody from all over the world was trying to come out on top at. And I did as an individual. And the idiot who says, I don't think it's fair and just wants to act like an idiot and do drugs or something, he didn't. Point number 10. The so-called historical resurrection of Christ. Now, this is a point that I actually disagree with of his. Some of these points aren't as strong as some of the other ones. This is one of them. So he was trying to merge that with the argument that Christ appeared to over 500 people over a 40-day period after he died, and so on and so forth. Well, says who, right? So I disagree with them on a point, that being a point that is very logical. And in fact, I disagree that the resurrection was literal. I do not believe it's literal. Okay. So I decided to throw that in there. And my religion is universal, pinpoint, and moral precision. I believe that the miracles, like walking on water, resurrecting people, like Elijah resurrected someone, Jesus, what have you, I believe that those are figurative and that the Bible is figurative. Point number 11. Life has never come from non-life is the argument that's made. Okay? And he's also arguing that if there's no God, then man does not have objective value or meaning. So what value do you have if life is by chance, right? Then what value does human life have? And that goes back to that moral absolute argument. If you truly believe in your heart that killing innocent children is wrong, then whether or not you've done the math, okay, you actually believe in God in a sense. Because without that belief in God, why is it wrong? Because you feel like it's wrong? So if somebody, hacks your brain and changes the way you feel about things, that magically it's okay? Because a bunch of people in a society was just one society in countless societies that have existed all over the world, that according to their values it's wrong. If you truly believe that killing innocent people is wrong in a way that transcends your mere race or culture or society, then you've placed an objective value on it, on human life to some degree. At least, a ballpark objective value, we'll say. And therefore, you're saying that there's some higher reason why that is. So what is it? Now, when we look at, I'm going to do this a little out of order here. I'll probably wrap this up because I got so much to do here that I'm going to have to do in a part 2. And I'm already way over time. I like to keep these videos kind of short. When you think about why it has to be one God, but what came first? It's even called first. You think a bunch of things came first at the same time? Well, ask yourself this. What is best practice? Are we better off with a bunch of people who disagree leading the government? Say 300 people, 5,000 people, 1 million people. Now, how do you get anything done? Are you better off with one person, one mind, one being running the whole show? That is best practice. That is the ideal formation. And as we have more mental clarity, as we have more moral wisdom in our life paths, in our works, in our actions, we become more like God. And so why would God do things in a way that's less effective than another way? God is perfect. Therefore, he's going to be one and he's going to be in charge. So the principle of one and the best practice. How does government, when God is governing, in a sense, he's governing, right, in that divine way, how is it best done? With one morally precise, all good, all knowing, all powerful leader. Thank you.